Welcome to the People Behind Property podcast, brought to you by O'Brien Real Estate. In this series, we shine a light on the personal stories, career journeys, and expert insights shaping Australia's real estate market. Meet the agents, the industry leaders, and the voices behind the O'Brien Network, because here, it's personal. So let's dive into today's conversation. Well, welcome back to the People Behind Property, where we share the stories, insights, and moments that shape people of O'Brien Real Estate. Today I'm joined by someone who embodies resilience, energy and genuine connection, Abby Ivankovic from our Wantirna office. From running hospitality venues to becoming the #1 agent in Boronia, all while raising her family as a solo mum, Abby's story is a testament to what's possible when you combine passion, purpose, and a do what it takes mindset. So let's dive in now. Welcome, Abby. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to see you. Let's just jump straight in here. I'm really curious about your journey from real estate into hospitality. What drew you into real estate from hospitality?
It's quite funny that you asked that question. I wanted to get into real estate when I was 18, back when I was working on Hamilton Island.
Yeah,
I remember having some conversations with some people there, and it just sounded like something that I would want to do or I was interested in.
Yep.
However, I was very young,
Yes.
and I wanted to go and travel and I guess work and just gain some life experience before kind of getting out there and I guess dealing with real estate and selling homes. So that's what I did. I kind of went out and travelled the world, lived abroad, worked in hospitality, and then probably in my kind of mid-20s, I knew I wanted more. You know, I knew that I'd kind of got as far as I could get in hospitality. You know, I was managing restaurants and events and cafes, and I had a client say to me one time, Abby, you should go into real estate.
You should go into real estate.
And I said, it's really funny that you say that because it's something that I have always had in the back of my mind.
Were they in real estate as well?
They weren't.
They weren't.
But they just said that you would be brilliant at it.
Yep.
You know, I was always really good with people. You know, I could sell anything to anyone, you know.
Yeah, well, I must say, like, obviously, because we only just worked together recently, and it was the first thing I kind of noticed, just like, wow, this person has this infectious energy. It just goes right through the house. So, yeah, I did notice that.
Yeah. So from there, I decided to call a friend, and I knew that she knew a real estate agent, and she put me in touch. And a few months later, I was working in real estate.
And here you are, how many years later?
10.
There you go. So what skills from hospitality have been surprisingly transferable to real estate for you?
I think hospitality is all customer service.
Yeah.
You know, it's building relationships, you know, with your regulars. And of course, you know, you are selling just to a very different, I don't know what it is, but, you know,
of course,
on a smaller spectrum.
Yeah.
But I think it's just, you know, that being personable, building relationships with people, and nurturing the people that you know. I think that's what's transferred.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, the other thing I've noticed with you is just that attention to detail. And I think in hospitality, it is all about those little 1%, isn't it?
It is. And going above and beyond.
Yes.
I think that's the biggest thing, you know, is that I've always gone above and beyond for, you know, every customer back in those hospo days, and now for every vendor and for every buyer.
That's right, yeah. No, I think that makes sense. So, was there a moment in early on in your career where you felt like, yes, I've made the right move? Like, did you know straight away, or did that kind of come later after you did the hard yards of real estate?
Definitely came further along.
Yeah.
I think those first few years, I was still young. I was, you know, not as young as some, but I was still, you know, in my kind of mid to late 20s, and, you know, I hadn't 100% fully committed, I don't think, until I really hit my kind of my 30s.
Yeah.
You know, like I knew I liked it, I knew I was good at it, but I don't think I went all in until further down the track.
Yeah, okay. Because you've been working under Grant now for how long?
I've been there for 7 years.
7 years, so probably off topic here, but how's that been, you know, working under Grant and out of that office has been good?
It's been really, really great. You know, Grant welcomed me with open arms 7 years ago. You know, I definitely knew where I was at that time was not the right fit for me. And we had worked together. We'd been to, you know, a Josh Fegan event together, and I definitely knew that that we aligned, you know, in many ways. And I'd met a lot of the O'Brien, I'd met Dean and I met a few other people, you know, with him at that Josh Fegan, and it you know, it felt right. Like it felt like it was the right fit. So I think coming across to a new brand where, you know, values aligned, because my values and the previous, it didn't align.
Yeah. What area were you working before you came to O'Brien? Was it the same Boronia or?
Yeah. So
okay, you're always working Boronia.
City of Knox. So Boronia and the City of Knox.
Yeah. So with building trust, like how do you build trust quickly with sellers in the area? Because do you live in Boronia or?
No, so I live down the peninsula.
Oh, Peninsula. So
Yeah.
how does that work for you? That's interesting. Like, you obviously make it work because you're number one in Boronia.
I started in Boronia,
Yeah.
you know, not because I chose Boronia as a suburb, but because, you know, I guess my step into the door was
Yeah.
in that area.
Yeah.
And I think what I learnt is, you know, to focus on an area and make that area your own, you know, was really, really important. You know, I saw a lot of agents in those early years, you know, toing and froing from different suburbs and different agencies and
Yeah.
never really, I guess, building a strong foundation. So, you know, I remember there was a female agent that worked in Montana, and, you know, and she owned that area. You know, she was the number one agent and she was very inspiring. She was my age. I
Yeah.
remember trying to break into that same market and I just felt like I had no chance. But it then gave me the inspiration to go and pick an area where there wasn't a young woman,
Yeah.
and go in and make that area my own. And that's what I did with Boronia. So, you know, 10
Definitely.
years ago, I started there. You know, I sell all around there, but I have focused on Boronia as a whole, to live and breathe it, know every school, every cafe, every
Yep.
park, and build a reputation for myself so that
Yep.
people know who I am.
It sounds like it doesn't matter where you live because you've just built this. Tom Panel says this a lot, which is around the attraction agent. How long do you think it kind of took you from when you started to become that attraction agent where people are calling you, they're not calling anyone else? Abby, can you come and see a house we need to sell? Like, how long did that kind of take?
It takes time.
Yeah.
I think I probably saw the shift probably 4 to 5 years in.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, it did take time. You know, it took time to get that social proof, to get the sales behind you, to get the reviews,
Yeah.
to build that name for yourself. I remember just kind of watching my statistics slowly go up and up and up, and, you know, and then it made me so hungry to kind of get to the top.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah.
was like, I'm halfway there, I can get there. And I remember probably 4 years ago, you know, I became the top selling agent in that area. And, you know, it was like all that hard work had paid off.
Yeah.
But then I was so hungry to stay there and, you know, and not lose that spot. And,
Yep.
you know, 4 years later, I haven't, you know.
So good.
So, which is amazing, you know, market share is, you know, I sell double anybody else in that area
Yeah.
and have consistently for a
So
long
good.
time.
And you know, you're living on the peninsula, so you found that secret
Work-life
source.
balance though, right? Like
Yeah.
I love to live down by the beach. I love to sell real estate in Boronia.
Yeah.
I like to be able to go to the shops and not run into a vendor or a purchaser and, you know, and have that divide, I guess. you
Yeah.
know. So Boronia is where I work and I love to sell properties there and I get to go home and relax by the beach.
Definitely. No, I think I think you've answered that really well about how to make that work. What else did you need to develop beyond your personality in terms of just building your career?
A lot.
Yeah.
You know, it's a big growth journey
Yeah.
from the get-go. You know, I'm a very sensitive person and I definitely had to grow a bit of a backbone and,
Yeah.
you know, I guess I am resilient, but, you know, not resilient in real estate and
Yeah.
being able to handle rejection. That
Yeah.
was the hardest part in those early years. You know, you'd put in so much time and so much effort and you'd build these relationships with these clients and then they wouldn't list with you.
Yeah.
And it was heartbreaking. I
Oh,
remember
definitely. You're just like,
crying a
the
few
whole
times.
world's ended or something.
I remember crying a few times, being like, I've just nurtured that client for 12 months and, you know, and they haven't gone with me. And it was never a personal thing. It was just that there were agents that had sold more at that time.
Yeah.
And, you know, but it was just handling the rejection was very, very difficult.
Yeah, I think
No.
that's interesting. My next question was, what hasn't come naturally to you? So that would be it.
Probably.
Yeah.
And I think also just, you know, skills around negotiation and skills around, you know, managing and talking with your vendors, you know, because it's initially it's new, you know, you
Yeah,
kind
of
of fake
course.
it till you make
Yeah,
it for those
yeah.
first few
Yeah.
years, you know, until you've, you know, sold some homes and had that deal exposure.
Yeah.
You know, it's learning the dialogue and getting confident around that, knowing the right questions to ask, and then how to kind of, you know, dissect that conversation to kind of get the result that you want or to
Yeah.
get into the door, you know, that you want to get into.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, time
Anything-
management. There's so many skills
So
you
many
need
things.
to learn.
How did you go about learning some of that stuff? Like, what were the things that you were doing along that journey?
Well, you know, I went to Josh Vegan every month for a very, 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 very long time. I
Yeah.
haven't been there, you know, since I've had Sunny, but,
Yeah.
you know, Josh Vegan is amazing. You
Yeah.
know, he teaches you a lot. You know, teaches you so much. Like the dialogue, you know, is probably one of the most key takeaways I've
Definitely.
got from him over the years.
Yeah.
And just managing different situations and in different times, because, over the last 10 years, we've had up markets and down markets, and, and being able to, I guess, tackle each one as it comes and, be able to get through that. But he was very, very helpful. I listened to a few podcasts over the years. I remember listening to the $1 Million Agent one, and, I got quite a lot from them over the years as well. And yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it sounds to me like you talked about backbone and kind of rejection and being that, probably oversensitive at a stage in your career, but it seems like if you've developed that, it probably crosses over and helped you in your personal life as well. Would you agree with that?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think as time goes on, you just learn not to take it personally. You're not going to be the right fit for every single person, and that's okay. And in those early years, you are going to get rejected probably more than you're not going to, because you haven't done it before, and you haven't got the sold properties. So I think initially you've got to just get through, that time, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, however long it might be, and just know that you won't get every listing, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Learn from it if you can. Sometimes there won't be anything that you did wrong. It'll just be that they knew the other agent. They were recommended through a friend.
Yeah.
There was a personal connection. Well, that agent just had sold more properties in the area.
Yeah.
But as time went on, and then I built, I guess, a name for myself, I was kind of able to go in and sell myself much more confidently.
Yeah.
And then start to win the business.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
then, as the years go on, you get more confident and more confident, because, you're really good at what you do.
Yeah.
And you can essentially show them how.
No, that's really good. Yeah, you're finding you still probably do prospecting, I'm assuming, or probably not as much.
Not as much as I used to.
Yeah.
I guess I'm very lucky in a sense that a lot of it just comes quite naturally now through past clients, referrals, people that I know, and a lot of social proof.
Yeah, yeah.
I do try.
And that's probably taken you that kind of 4 to 5 years just to get to that level. Yeah,
100%.
And I think for anyone listening, I think it's important to note. But it's the same, for male, female, and I think, we all know females generally make better agents than males. So, I guess, which is interesting, leads me into my next question. How do you define, why choose me and stay authentic? I suppose, that Knox area, there's a lot of male agents there. Like, how have you differentiated yourself?
I think I used being a female as a bit of a superpower.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day,
absolutely,
there was not many women in in that area, and there still really isn't to this day. As I said, I remember back 10 years ago, there was, an agent that was working in the Wantirna area, and, she dominated. She was amazing at what she did.
Yeah.
And then she left, to have a family and never came back. And I remember, just thinking like, there aren't any women in this area, so own that.
Yeah.
That's your point
Absolutely.
of difference.
Yeah.
It's the empathy, it's the caring and the nurturing that I think that we offer. I'm not saying that men don't, but, that's what sets me apart.
Definitely.
Being able to, nurture that client and just really genuinely care about not only the transaction, but also the person and their situation, because it's not always a happy time to be selling a property. There's, it can be quite emotional, and sometimes people need that support. So I think for me, it was just being true to myself. It was always being honest. For me, that was the most important thing in my journey, was to always be honest and transparent with every person, never overpromise, and just be a woman of my word.
Definitely. No, I think that shines through, certainly from what I've seen. So it's great. I guess this is interesting too. Like, what advice would you give new agents? But I'm going to change that. Like, what advice would you give female agents that are trying to define their personal brand?
I think, women are powerful and we're amazing, and we're strong. And I think you just got to go out there and give it your all, and just know that we're all capable, more than capable.
Yep.
But it is hard work. It does take time. It doesn't happen overnight. Going, knowing that people are going to hang up on you. People aren't going to want to talk to you all the time.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's actually okay.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of the time you're calling someone, they haven't asked for you to be called.
No, that's right.
But then you'll get someone that will have a lovely chat with you, and that will give you the bit of confidence to make the next call. And then you make the appointment. It's a numbers game. 20 calls, you get one appraisal, it's worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely.
we're all capable.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's talk about solo mum in real estate. And I think this is another really good one for females that are out there thinking they can't do it. How have you managed kind of mentally, emotional load as a solo parent? What does that look like? How do you do that? And what's kind of a typical week for you look like?
To be honest, like it's a lot. Obviously I am a solo mum and I essentially still am working full time in real estate, but in my own time, in my own hours. So I guess how I make that work is I have my designated days where my son goes to family daycare or is with my mum. And they're my days where I'm, doing my face-to-face appointments, meeting clients, doing my open homes. And outside of that, it's finding time, when he's asleep or, I'm not with him to be able to kind of follow up on everything else. So there's a lot of time management and, I guess a lot of sacrifice. I sacrifice a lot of my evenings. I put him to bed at 7:30 and I sit at my laptop for 2 hours, and catch up on, proposals things. And offers and, but I guess all my clients know I'm a mum, I'm very open about that.
Definitely.
They know they're going to get calls after hours. I think I make it work for us. But it's not easy, it's a lot. There's definitely not enough hours in the days. There's not enough hours in the weeks. But I love what I do, and I feel like I'm a hustler. So it's what I do. I hustle.
Yes.
And I love what I do. So it doesn't feel like I'm always working.
No.
I'm doing something that I love. That essentially is my career, and that, is what gives us the life that we live. So
yeah, definitely. And that's a great thing about real estate, I suppose. There is flexibility there. And you've obviously carved out the life that you need to have, with your son and how that kind of works. So I suppose, what message would you share with other solo mums, considering this career path?
That's a really hard question because I don't know. I guess I'd established myself before having a child. I think going into real estate fresh, with a young child would be very difficult. If I'm completely honest, I don't know if that would be the exact right time. Obviously that could be different.
Because you kind of did that 4 or 5 years, how far longer?
Essentially, I never planned to have a baby on my own. It just happened. But I guess, I'd always thought I wouldn't want to have a family until I was, financially stable and, had kind of built that career because career is super important to me. So I think, I'd already done all the hard work to establish myself as a reputable agent in my area. Before having a child. So that when I did have a child, I was able to be a lot more flexible and able to kind of, have that flexibility, but also not have to prospect as hard because the business was naturally coming to me because I'd done those 8 years.
Definitely.
Of hard slog.
You'd already done that. And look, I think that's a really good insight because, there might be some solo mums out there thinking, I'll get into real estate, but the timing's everything, isn't it?
Timing is everything. I'm actually talking to a lady at the moment who, is potentially thinking about coming on board with me. And, she's always wanted to get into real estate, but, she knew that she couldn't until her kids were older. Her kids are now in high school and now she really wants to, I guess, explore. So obviously we're in conversation, nothing has happened just yet, but for her the time is right now. Because she can go all in. So I do think you need to go all in as an agent.
At the start.
At the beginning. To kind of get to where I am now.
Yeah, definitely not. I definitely agree with that, and that's paid off. And here you are, 10 years later.
Here I am.
Open homes, how do you kind of go about building appraisal leads at opens? Do you find it's always on your mind, or is it just something you don't really focus on that much?
It's just natural conversation. I think when I meet a buyer, I'm very interested to know their situation, where they've come from, what they're looking to do, and it doesn't even come across ever as an intrusive question because it's just like, are you local? Have you bought before? Is this your second home? Are you upsizing? And then people just naturally start talking to you.
Well, they do to you because
they
you're just so warm.
And they give me information. And then from there, I'm able to kind of, I guess, essentially find out their reason for looking at a house, whether it's, like I said, upsizing, downsizing and relocating. And then from there, ask the question. I'm not afraid to ask the question. I think that's the important thing.
That's important.
Can I come out and have a look at your property?
Yeah.
You can.
Do you have a certain strategy where, you know, those people that are the just looking ones and they're a bit guarded, is there anything you kind of, you know, do there just to open people up? Or you just let them be?
If people are not going to give you anything,
Yeah.
then I would let it be.
Yeah.
But I'll definitely ask a few questions and try. And, you know, in those early days, there are people that are guarded at the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, but I think it's just, you know, being super soft and being, you know, not coming on too hard with them and just asking the right questions or giving them some information so that they then feel like they can essentially let their guard down a little bit and open up to you. I was very good at that, you know, looking
Yes.
back at kind of breaking through. But I think that's just being kind and being warm and inviting and just having a conversation rather than trying to get in their door straight away.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, no, that makes sense. You talk about that you're a hustler, and I love that you're a hustler. It's awesome. So if we talk about the early hustling, you know, what habits kind of helped you gain traction in the early years, do you think?
I did a lot of things that I didn't want to do. I
Yep.
did a lot of door knocking back then because
Yep.
that's kind of what you did 10 years ago. I don't know if it's as common now, but, you know, back then I remember the agent I worked for, I had to go and door knock every day. Rain, hail or shine.
Oh my God. So if there was a moment where you felt like giving up, was that it?
Oh, I definitely questioned it in those moments. But
Yeah.
you know what? To be honest, I was really good at it.
Were you?
So, you know, people, you know, like, I would have people close the door in my face, but then I would have people that, you know, were so lovely and would give me their number and their details
Yeah.
and I'd do appraisals.
Did you walk through a few right then and there and just...
There was a few over, you know, in
Yeah.
those early stages.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing was just getting on the phone, you know, and just getting confident on the phone. You know, obviously I was very lucky. I worked for a very established agent in the area. So
Yeah.
I was able to work on all of his properties and buyers was, you know, focusing on the buyers.
Yeah.
You know, there's always people looking to buy
Definitely.
and
They
sell.
always talk to you,
in
the
that
buyers,
space.
don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, it was just prospecting. You know, you've got to prospect so much in those
Yeah.
early years. You know, you've got to book those market appraisals. You know, they turn into listings. You know,
Yeah.
it might not be right then.
No.
You know, I've sold people's houses, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the track, you know, from an appraisal,
Yeah.
you know, that I've
Yeah.
then just nurtured. And they're the special ones because, you know, you've
Yeah.
built such a nice relationship with them over the
Yeah.
time that, you know, when it comes time to sell, it's just you are their agent.
Yeah. And you've got obviously some strategy around nurturing data, your database. And what
Yeah,
you're
like
doing
I think
around, so-
pipeline's super important, and
Yeah.
I've always been really focused on that. You know, when I say I don't really prospect anymore, that's probably what I prospect on is my, you know, I've got my spreadsheet, I've got my, you know, the people that I know that are, you know, looking to do something, and I think
Yeah.
nurturing them, you know, is super, super important to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, and obviously adding people to that, you know, pipeline week, you know, each
Yeah,
week and
of
each
course.
day.
Here's an interesting one. Like, if you had, what was one early mistake you made that taught you a lot in those early kind of years, do you think?
I was thinking about this on the way here,
Yeah.
and I'm not quite sure I know the answer.
Like, what about just some shifts or, you know, some times when you've had to pivot, like, okay, that's not working. I need to, you know, kind of change direction here.
I think for me, like, there was probably like a pivotal moment where I obviously just shifted my mindset in real estate and obviously went from, you know, just kind of it being a job to it being a career. But mistakes, you know, like obviously there's little mistakes made all the time and you learn
Yep.
from them. I just can't think of one on
No,
top
that's
of my
all right.
head that was, you know, a pivotal moment. Or,
No, that's okay. There's probably many micro moments
but
where...
you're learning all the time. You know,
Yeah.
you're learning, you know, there's different situations and, you know, like different people and different personalities, you know, so you're constantly learning. You're constantly evolving as a real estate agent, I believe.
Okay, no, that's really good. I think this has been a really good chat. I like to finish these podcast sessions with 3 questions. So I think really enjoyed our chat. I think it's going to help a lot of people that are looking to get into real estate and things to think about, especially females. We need more females out there. So first question is, what was one lesson or mindset shift that changed everything for you in your real estate career? If you go back even to the hospitality.
I think just I think
Yeah.
for me, the biggest thing for me was just, you know, letting go, like it was the rejection, you know,
Yeah.
like letting go of that, you know, I'm not sure who said it along the journey, but,
Yeah.
you know, at an event or a training, you know, someone said, if you lose a listing, you write it on a bit of toilet paper and you flush it down the toilet and you let it go. And you know what? I actually did that
Yeah.
for a little while.
Yeah.
And it worked.
I
you
think
know?
that's a really good kind of symbolism of...
It worked because, you know, like move on to the next one.
Yeah.
I always, what was really important to me though, if I lost the listing, I always said, thank you so much for having me out. I'm here if you need me.
Yeah.
That was really, really important to me, never to be salty or,
Yeah.
because a lot of the time they would actually come back to you because not always did the agent that they go with be able to deliver what they promised. But I think just letting go of the rejection and just knowing that it's inevitable.
Yeah.
But just move on to the next.
Move on to the next.
Move on to the
I like the toilet paper thing.
It was. I don't remember I can't remember where it came from.
Yeah.
But
because some of those come back to you.
They do. My best friend said to me early on. She goes, you've got to get rid of the negative energy. So sometimes I would sit in the car and I would have called someone and I wouldn't have got the listing, or a sale maybe didn't go through, and I would sit there and I would brush off the bad energy so that I could go into the next appointment clear, with a clear mind.
Yeah.
So that I went in there being the best version of myself, rather than worried about what just happened beforehand.
Exactly. You've already let it go. Done.
Let it go.
Love it.
Let it go.
Second last question. So 2 more to go, Abby, here. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice when starting in this industry, what would it be? So you're going back to hospitality maybe, back down in those early years. What would one piece of advice you would have given yourself been?
Trust in yourself and believe in yourself.
Yeah. No, I love it. That's a great answer. Last one. What's next for you? Any big goals or passions you're working on in life? Obviously your son, or in life or in business. Anything on the radar?
I think for me, Sonny is my reason and he's my why. I work hard because I want to give him the most amazing life that I possibly can. Anyone in this network will know that I love to travel.
Yes.
And it is, a big driver, and it's definitely, something that's super important to me, not only to be able to see the world and experience that, but to be able to reset and recharge, to kind of come back and do it all again. But, we have big dreams of, doing a lot of travel, and one day, I don't know how I'm going to do it in real estate, but I would love to, pack up for 12 months and, do a lap of Australia.
Yeah.
And, experience that and have that time with him as well, where it is uninterrupted. It's probably not going to be in the next couple of years, but, definitely down the track.
Yep.
As for business, I think at the moment, I'm happy where I'm at. Obviously, I'm always wanting to grow and be better.
Yeah.
But I think until Sonny goes to school, or, I've got some more time.
Yeah.
I'm happy just being an agent and being a great agent and just, getting better each day.
Awesome, Abby. Well, you're a great mum. You're a great agent. You're an integral part of Grant's team at the One Turner office there. Abby, thank you for sharing your story. It's been inspiring to hear how you've turned life's challenges into fueling your success, whether it's your warmth at open homes, your ethical approach in a competitive market, or your ability to juggle it all as a solo parent. You remind us that real estate really is personal. To our listeners, if Abby's story resonates with you, make sure to subscribe, share this episode, and stay tuned for more stories from the people behind property at O'Brien Real Estate. Until next time, thank you, Abby.
Thanks, Andrew.